Dad left everything to me, not you," Rebecca screamed, her voice echoing through the house I had called home for 15 years. I stood there, clutching Harold's funeral program, still wearing my black dress from the service just 3 days earlier. My heart felt like it had been torn in half all over again. My name is Marianne, and I am 59 years old. Until this moment, I thought I knew my place in this family. Harold and I had been married for 15 years, and I had raised Rebecca since she was 13 after her mother passed away. Now, at 28, she was acting like a stranger who despised everything about me. Harold left specific instructions about how things should be handled, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe we should sit down and discuss this calmly. Rebecca's face twisted with fury. There's nothing to discuss. The lawyer already explained everything to me. The house, the money, the investments. It's all mine now. $7 million, and you get nothing. The cruelty in her voice shocked me. This was the same girl I had helped with homework, driven to school events, and comforted through teenage heartbreaks. Where was the gratitude for the woman who had stepped in to mother her when she needed it most? "Rebecca, I'm not trying to take anything from you," I said, reaching toward her. "I just thought we could work together to handle Harold's affairs properly." She jerked away from my touch. "Work together? You were just his second wife. I'm his blood, his real family. You were convenient when he needed someone to cook and clean, but now that he's gone, you're not needed anymore." Her words hit me like physical blows. I had loved Harold deeply, and I thought he had loved me too. We had built a life together, sharing dreams and making plans for the future. I had never thought of myself as just convenient. "Your father and I had many conversations about the future," I began, but Rebecca cut me off. "Stop calling him my father like you have some claim to him. He's dead now, and his daughter inherits everything. That's how it works in real families." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. There was something cold and calculating in Rebecca's expression that I had never seen before. It was as if Harold's death had unleashed a side of her that had been hidden all these years. "I think you need to read the will more carefully," I said softly. Rebecca's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, I've read it. Everything comes to me. The only thing you need to worry about is finding somewhere else to live." I retreated to the bedroom I had shared with Harold, my hands trembling as I closed the door. The room still smelled like his cologne, and his reading glasses sat on the nightstand where he had left them. 3 days ago, we had been planning a trip to Europe for our anniversary. Now I was being told to pack my belongings and leave. Harold had been a successful financial advisor who built his wealth through careful investments and smart business decisions. When we met at a community theater production 15 years ago, I was a recent widow trying to rebuild my life. He was a single father struggling to raise a teenage daughter while managing his growing business. We found comfort in each other's company, and eventually love. Rebecca had seemed to accept me at first. She was grieving her mother's death and needed stability. I tried to fill that role without ever attempting to replace her mother's memory. We shared quiet dinners, shopping trips for school clothes, and late-night conversations about her future. I thought we had built a genuine bond over the years, but looking back now, I wondered if Rebecca had simply been tolerating me while waiting for this moment. Had she always seen me as an intruder in her family? Had every kind gesture been an act? I walked to Harold's desk, where he kept important documents. Harold had always been meticulous about legal matters, often spending hours reviewing contracts and financial statements. He frequently mentioned wanting to protect both Rebecca and me, ensuring we would both be cared for after he was gone. "You have to understand," he had told me just 6 months ago. "Rebecca is young and sometimes impulsive. I need to make sure she's truly ready to handle this kind of responsibility." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Rebecca worked as a marketing coordinator for a small design firm and seemed to be maturing into a responsible adult. She dated occasionally but hadn't settled down, preferring to focus on her career and social life. Now I was starting to understand what Harold might have seen that I had missed. The way Rebecca complained about having to visit him in the hospital during his final weeks. How she seemed more interested in discussing his assets than spending time with him. The subtle remarks about how much the house would be worth if it were renovated and modernized. A knock at the bedroom door interrupted my thoughts. "Marianne!" Rebecca's voice was sharp with impatience. "I need you to start packing your things. I've already called a contractor about updating this room, and they're coming tomorrow morning." The audacity took my breath away. Her father's body was barely cold, and she was already planning renovations. I opened the door to find Rebecca standing there with her phone in one hand and a notebook in the other. "I'm thinking of expanding the master suite and adding a walk-in closet," she continued, as if she were discussing weekend plans instead of dismantling the life Harold and I had built together. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices and footsteps throughout the house. Rebecca had indeed called contractors, and they were measuring rooms and discussing renovation plans. The noise felt like desecration, as if she were erasing Harold's presence from his own home. I found Rebecca in the kitchen, surrounded by fabric samples and paint chips, talking animatedly on her phone. "Yes, I want the entire first floor opened up. Money is no object," she was saying. "This house hasn't been updated since the 90s, and it needs to reflect a more modern lifestyle." When she saw me, she ended her call abruptly. "Good, you're up. I need you to clear out Dad's office today. The architect wants to turn it into a wine cellar with a tasting area." A wine cellar. Harold barely drank, and Rebecca's idea of wine appreciation was buying whatever bottle had the prettiest label at the grocery store. "Rebecca, don't you think you're moving too quickly? Your father just passed away 3 days ago. Maybe we should take some time to grieve before making major changes." Her expression hardened. "I don't need grief counseling from you. I've already mourned him. Now I need to move forward with my life. And that means making this house work for me." She walked over to a contractor who was examining the living room walls. "Can we take this wall down completely? I want to create an entertainment space with a large screen television and a bar area." I watched in horror as she casually discussed demolishing the walls that housed Harold's favorite family photos and the built-in bookshelves where he kept his collection of financial journals. These weren't just walls to me, they were memories. "I'm going to the bank this afternoon to start the paperwork for accessing Dad's accounts," Rebecca announced when the contractor stepped outside. "I want to get everything transferred into my name as quickly as possible." "The accounts?" I asked, confused. "Harold always handled our finances jointly. Are you sure there won't be any complications?" Rebecca's smile was condescending. "Marianne, you obviously don't understand how inheritance works. When someone dies, their assets go to their children, not their spouse's second time around. Dad's lawyer explained everything to me yesterday." She pulled out a folder thick with documents. "See? Here's the will, the insurance policies, the investment accounts. It's all very straightforward. $7 million, all going directly to me." I stared at the papers she was waving, noting that she seemed to have only selected portions of the documentation. Harold had always been thorough about legal matters, often creating multiple layers of protection for important decisions. "Rebecca, are you certain you have all the documents? Your father was very careful about these things." "Of course I have everything," she snapped. "What are you implying? That I don't know how to read legal papers?" The contractors returned, and Rebecca immediately turned her attention back to renovation plans, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her hand. By afternoon, Rebecca had transformed into a woman I barely recognized. She strutted through the house like she owned a palace, pointing out changes to be made and discussing expensive upgrades with an enthusiasm that felt almost manic. "I'm thinking marble countertops in the kitchen," she told one contractor, "and maybe we can expand the master bathroom to include a steam shower." I tried one more time to reach the daughter I thought I knew. "Rebecca, can we please talk privately? I feel like we're both still processing Harold's death, and maybe we're making decisions too quickly." She turned to me with exaggerated patience, as if I were a slow child. "Marianne, I appreciate that you're having trouble accepting the new reality. But this is my house now. I'm not making rash decisions. I'm finally able to make the improvements Dad never wanted to spend money on." "Harold was careful with money because he wanted to ensure long-term security for both of us," I replied. "Both of us?" Rebecca laughed harshly. "There is no us anymore. There's me, the heir, and there's you, the woman who happened to marry my father. You got 15 years of living in a nice house and not having to work. That should be enough gratitude for anyone." Her cruelty was breathtaking, but what shocked me more was how calculated it seemed. This wasn't grief talking. This was a plan she had been nurturing for years. "Your father loved me," I said quietly. "And I thought you cared about me too." "Love?" Rebecca's voice rose. "You were a convenience. Dad needed someone to cook his meals and keep house while he focused on building wealth for his real family. You played house for 15 years, but the game is over now." She gestured toward the contractors, who were pretending not to listen to our conversation. "I've got real plans for this place. I'm going to turn it into something worthy of a young professional woman, not some middle-aged widow's cozy nest." The insult stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What about Harold's wishes? Don't you think we should honor his memory?" "Honor his memory?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "The best way to honor Dad's memory is to enjoy the wealth he worked so hard to build. He didn't accumulate $7 million so it could sit in boring investments forever." She pulled out her phone and showed me a shopping app with several luxury items in her cart. "I'm already looking at a new car. Dad's old sedan is embarrassing. I need something that reflects my new status." I stared at the screen, seeing handbags worth more than most people's monthly salaries and jewelry that cost more than a year of groceries. "Rebecca, this kind of spending isn't sustainable, even with a large inheritance. Harold always said, Harold always said, Harold always said," she mocked. "Harold isn't here anymore to micromanage every dollar. I'm 28 years old, and I deserve to enjoy life while I'm young enough to appreciate it." She scrolled through more expensive items, adding them to her cart with reckless abandon. "Besides, $7 million is more money than I could spend in a lifetime, even living luxuriously. I can afford to renovate this house, buy whatever I want, and still have millions left over." I watched her face as she spoke, seeing an excitement that bordered on fever. She wasn't just planning to spend Harold's money. She was planning to waste it in ways that would have horrified him. "What if there are conditions attached to the inheritance?" I asked carefully. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What kind of conditions?" "I don't know," I admitted. But Harold was always careful about financial decisions. It would be unusual for him to leave such a large sum without some kind of oversight. "You're just trying to scare me because you're jealous," Rebecca said, but I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. That evening, Rebecca's plans became even more grandiose. She called friends, inviting them over to celebrate her inheritance and see the house that would soon be renovated into her dream space. I retreated to Harold's office, the one room Rebecca hadn't yet claimed for demolition. Sitting at his desk, I could almost feel his presence. Harold had been methodical about everything, from his morning coffee routine to his investment strategies. The idea that he would leave such a substantial inheritance without careful planning seemed completely out of character. I began looking through his desk drawers, searching for documents Rebecca might have overlooked. Harold kept meticulous records, and I knew he had worked with his attorney recently to update his estate planning. In the bottom drawer, I found a file labeled Estate Planning Confidential. Inside were several documents I hadn't seen before, including correspondence with the law firm of Morrison, Hayes & Associates. One letter, dated just 2 months before Harold's death, caught my attention. "Dear Mr. Harold," it began, "per your request, we have established the Rebecca Trust Fund with the conditions and restrictions discussed in our meeting. The trust will ensure your daughter learns financial responsibility while protecting both her and your spouse's long-term interests. My hands trembled as I read further. The letter detailed a complex trust structure with very specific conditions. Rebecca would not receive direct access to the inheritance until she turned 35. Until then, all funds would be managed by a trustee, and according to the document, Harold had named me as the primary trustee. I could hear Rebecca and her friends laughing loudly in the living room, their voices carrying through the house as they celebrated what they thought was her windfall. "I'm thinking of taking a year off work to travel," I heard Rebecca saying. "Why should I work some boring job when I'm independently wealthy now?" Another voice asked, "Are you sure you want to quit so quickly? What if there are complications with the inheritance?" "Complications?" Rebecca's laugh was dismissive. "What kind of complications? Dead dad, living daughter, $7 million. It's pretty straightforward." I continued reading the trust documents, discovering layer after layer of conditions Harold had put in place. Rebecca would need trustee approval for any expenditure over $500. She would be required to maintain steady employment or pursue education. Most significantly, the trust included specific language about demonstrating respect for family members and honoring the deceased's values. A separate document outlined Harold's reasoning for these restrictions. He had observed Rebecca's impulsive spending habits and her sometimes selfish behavior. He worried that sudden wealth would destroy her character rather than enhance her life. The trust was designed to help her mature into someone worthy of the inheritance. But there was more. Harold had also included provisions for my own financial security. The trust would provide for my housing, health care, and living expenses for the rest of my life. He had protected both of us, ensuring Rebecca couldn't abandon her responsibilities to the family, while also ensuring I wouldn't be left vulnerable. The final document in the file was a sealed envelope with my name written in Harold's careful handwriting. Inside was a personal letter. "My dear Marianne," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and Rebecca has probably behaved exactly as I feared she would. I know my daughter, and I know she can be cruel when she wants something. I'm sorry you're experiencing this, but please know that I have made arrangements to protect both of you from her worst impulses. The trust will teach her what I was never able to, that wealth without character is meaningless. Be patient with her, but also be strong. You have more power than she realizes." The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. I was in the kitchen, trying to avoid the chaos of contractors and Rebecca's increasingly elaborate renovation plans, when her cell phone rang. "This is Rebecca," she answered cheerfully, clearly expecting more congratulatory calls from friends. But her expression changed quickly from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to alarm. "What do you mean, frozen?" she demanded. "That can't be right. I'm the sole heir." I watched as her face grew pale, then flushed red with anger. "No, you don't understand. My father left me $7 million. I was just at your bank yesterday discussing the accounts." There was a long pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. "A trust? What trust? The will said everything comes to me." Another pause, and now Rebecca's hands were shaking. "I need to come in immediately. This is obviously some kind of mistake." She ended the call and stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, staring at her phone as if it had personally betrayed her. "What was that about?" I asked, though I already suspected. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "The bank says the accounts are frozen. They say there's some kind of trust that controls access to the money." She looked at me with wild eyes. "You knew about this, didn't you? That's why you kept asking about conditions and complications." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "I knew your father was thorough about financial planning." "Where are the trust documents?" Rebecca demanded. "I need to see exactly what this means." "I believe they're with Harold's attorney," I replied calmly. Rebecca was already dialing her phone. "Mr. Morrison, this is Rebecca. I need to see you immediately about my father's trust. What do you mean I should bring Marianne?" She ended the call and stared at me with growing horror. "He says you're the trustee. He says I need your permission to access any significant funds. The contractors chose that moment to return from their lunch break, ready to begin the demolition Rebecca had authorized just hours earlier. "Miss Rebecca?" one of them called out. "Should we start taking down that wall in the living room?" Rebecca looked at the contractors, then at me, then back at the contractors. The reality of her situation was starting to sink in. "How much is this renovation going to cost?" I asked quietly. "About $50,000, she whispered. "And how much money do you have in your personal accounts?" "About $3,000. The lead contractor approached us. "We'll need the first payment before we start any work. That'll be $15,000. Rebecca's face crumbled as the full weight of her situation became clear. She had quit her job that morning, spent her personal savings on a shopping spree, and committed to expensive renovations she couldn't afford, all based on access to money that was now locked away from her. "I need to call them back," she said desperately. "There has to be a way to fix this." But I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to understand. The power dynamic she thought she controlled had just reversed completely. She wasn't the wealthy heiress making demands. She was a 28-year-old woman who had just discovered she was entirely dependent on the stepmother she had tried to throw out of the house. The contractors were waiting for an answer, and Rebecca looked at me with something I hadn't seen from her in years. Genuine fear. "Marianne." Rebecca's voice cracked as she said my name. "We need to talk. Privately." I nodded to the contractors. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about the renovation timeline. We'll need to postpone any work until we can sort out the financing." The lead contractor looked confused, but Miss Rebecca already signed the contract and scheduled us to start today. "I understand," I said calmly, "but circumstances have changed. We'll contact you once we've resolved the financial arrangements." After the contractors left, grumbling about wasted time and delayed projects, Rebecca collapsed into one of Harold's leather chairs. The triumphant, cruel woman from yesterday had been replaced by someone who looked lost and frightened. "Tell me exactly what this trust means," she said quietly. I sat across from her, the trust document spread on the coffee table between us. "Your father created a structure designed to help you learn financial responsibility. Until you turn 35, I control all access to his estate." 35? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "That's 7 years from now." 7 years, I confirmed. "During that time, you'll receive a monthly allowance of $500 for personal expenses. Anything beyond that requires my approval as trustee." Rebecca stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "But I need more than $500 a month. I can't live on that. Your father assumed you would continue working to support yourself, using the trust fund as supplemental income rather than your primary source of money." "But I already quit my job," Rebecca said desperately. "I told my boss yesterday that I wouldn't be coming back because I was independently wealthy." The irony wasn't lost on me. In her eagerness to claim Harold's fortune, Rebecca had eliminated her own source of income. The trust also includes provisions for your housing, health care, and education, I continued. "But those funds are released only for approved purposes and only with trustee oversight." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since Harold's death. "What do I have to do?" she asked. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me, seeing glimpses of the daughter I had once known buried beneath the greed and cruelty of the past few days. "The trust requires you to demonstrate financial responsibility, maintain steady employment or pursue education, and show respect for family members," I explained. "Your father was very specific about that last requirement." Rebecca winced, clearly remembering her behavior toward me. "There's also a clause about honoring his values and maintaining the family home appropriately," I continued. "Harold loved this house and wanted it preserved, not gutted for trendy renovations." "So you control everything," Rebecca said bitterly. "You get to decide whether I deserve access to my own inheritance." Your father's inheritance, I corrected gently. And yes, he trusted me to make decisions that would be in your best long-term interests. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, processing the reality of her situation. Finally, she looked up at me with something resembling humility. What happens if I don't meet the requirements? I consulted the trust documents. If you fail to comply with the terms, the trust fund will be donated to financial literacy charities, and you'll receive nothing. The color drained from Rebecca's face. He would really do that? Cut me off completely? Your father believed that wealth without character was worthless, I replied. He structured the trust to ensure you would develop both. Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Harold had lovingly maintained. For the first time since his death, she seemed to be actually thinking about him, rather than his money. I've been horrible to you, she said without turning around. Yes, I agreed. You have been. She turned back to face me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Can you ever forgive me? Rebecca faced 7 years of financial dependence on the stepmother she had cruelly evicted, with Harold's trust requiring demonstrated respect, responsibility, and family care before she could access her inheritance. Her attempts to find new employment were complicated by her impulsive resignation and lack of professional references, forcing her to take entry-level positions that barely covered her basic expenses while she waited for trust fund approvals. The expensive car she had ordered was repossessed when she couldn't make the payments, and her social circle gradually distanced themselves as they realized her wealthy heiress status was largely fictional. Her credit suffered as unpaid bills accumulated, and she was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom in Harold's house, living under my oversight and following house rules she had once scorned. The humiliation of explaining to contractors, friends, and colleagues that she had been mistaken about her inheritance damaged her reputation and made her the subject of local gossip about the spoiled daughter who had tried to throw out her grieving stepmother only to discover she needed my approval for everything. As I signed the lease for my comfortable apartment paid for by the trust's provisions for my care, I realized Harold's wisdom had created something more valuable than immediate wealth. He had given Rebecca the opportunity to earn what she received, rather than simply inheriting it without growth. And he had ensured that his love for both of us would continue protecting our family long after his death. Sometimes the most profound revenge is not about punishment, but about teaching someone the true value of what they almost threw away.